This will be a very somber edition, the final episode of the Five-Star Podcast of Wrestling, as myself and Justin Lowery look back at the last 2.5 years that we've shared together talking the world of professional wrestling. That's to come on this edition of the Five-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Hey there, Sean Meyers coming to you one last time as the host of the Five-Star Podcast of Wrestling. We'll discuss that momentarily, but first let me welcome in co-host Justin Lowery. Justin, I know that this is something we've been talking about for probably almost a year as far as when we would finally bring an end to the Five-Star Podcast of Wrestling, and we decided that this would be the final episode. Get into a little bit later why that might be, but before we start talking about what has happened maybe in recent weeks and months, some of the wrestling trends, I want to get your thoughts on doing this show, because I think I've told you this. This was an idea I took directly from you, where you proposed having a podcast. You weren't the first co-host, I will admit that. We will hear from our first co-host, Sean Saputo, a little bit later, but this was actually something you proposed because I think you realized that I had tried to get involved with wrestling companies to no avail, unfortunately, by the way. If anyone wants to reach out, I would certainly be open for business in that capacity. But this is something that you and I kind of decided we could do semi-regularly to converse about wrestling while also sort of filling that void of professional wrestling that I was not able to fulfill looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I think I also came up with the name, too. At least five-star.
You fired a lot of names. A lot of them were already taken, believe it or not. Almost the entire wrestling terminology has been used in some podcast at some point or another.
It's very believable. I mean, we were a little late in the game here. But it's something you wanted to start doing. I fired out some shots, and 2.5 years later, here you are.
This is actually, we came just shy of another milestone, I believe, if the numbers are correct. This is our 149th episode. So we're not going to make it to 150. It's okay. It's okay. Maybe a reunion show down the road will be number 150. And we go back to, again, you were not on the very first few episodes, although you were instrumental in the idea, and I talked to you about this the whole time. It was actually right before WrestleMania 34. So that's 2018, right before WrestleMania. You're talking late March. Now we're just past SummerSlam in 2020. So we've gone a solid 2.5 years, 3 WrestleManias in the process. And at the time, this was a very big void that I had because I had just lost a job in broadcasting. I was basically trying to find out where I was going to go next, find a way to sort of fill my time and expand my abilities. So creating a podcast, you have to learn a lot of new stuff. That was instrumental, very valuable, because I've gained future employment as a result of some of these skills. So that was very important at the time. But Justin, our schedules have changed quite a bit. I will speak to mine momentarily, but I know you are in a much different place now than when you were about 2.5 years ago. So talk about that a little bit on a personal side.
Yeah, I guess the biggest difference is I became a dad. So that takes up a lot more of your time, for sure. There's no way I can do this with the, my son being up or around me. Either my wife has to be home or he needs to be in bed.
How long until he's a wrestling fan? Like an actual, like he understands and wants to watch it? Do you think it'll happen?
Maybe. I mean, look, I'm just saying that. I'm not just saying this, but when I do put wrestling on TV, he does, pay attention for a couple minutes. He doesn't really focus in on anything quite yet on a television, but he does jump off the couches on the cushions with elbows and splashes, and that's the God's honest truth. My wife tells me it's my fault because, I put wrestling on in front of him. My dad did explain to me when I was really young, he had to turn it off because I was doing things like that, jumping off furniture, stuff like that. Being young, they didn't really want me doing.
No broken bones, I hope, right?
No broken bones. Now, I think I showed on past episodes the Lex Luger wrestling buddy from my childhood. So he does use that, and he does beat that up. I actually got that from my parents' house because he was beating up the dog. And the dog didn't really like it.
Yeah, understandable. Lex Luger doesn't complain as much.
No, and the tag says 1992, so that's a pretty damn old wrestling buddy.
Yeah, I have stuff that even predates that. I have my Hasbro figures still. And it's interesting you said, I know originally you started watching wrestling from your father, passing it now down potentially to your son. So we might see three generations there. I was the same way. I watched it, as a 4, 5, 6 year old with my dad and sort of, became a much bigger fan than he ever was. But that was the origin, the genesis of it. For me, I don't have a child, but I have a job that requires a lot of nights and a lot of weekends. So with your schedule and my schedule, it's very difficult. And as you know, Justin, 2 weeks ago, I got back to doing high school football. That's Friday nights. And we had been doing the show, you and I, pretty much exclusively on Friday nights after SmackDown. So that changed. The workload is pretty significant that I have for a lot of the week. So just finding time, even today, as we do this on a Saturday afternoon, there was some uncertainty as would we do it early in the day, would we do it late at night, kind of found some middle ground. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons. I will kind of expand it to, from your sake, it just doesn't seem like you are as big of a wrestling fan now as you were 2.5 years ago. So where do you see that trending, and to what do you attribute that?
It's trending down. I watched less and less. I've never watched wrestling less than I have now. So that all, going back to the last question, that also might affect my son because I don't have it on like my dad did. I think my dad got out of it right after the Attitude Era. So I was probably like 14, 15-ish when he stopped watching.
I will say, if your son becomes a fan, I think that maybe brings you back in even a little bit more if you want to, share an experience.
Because he's going to be like, "Hey, Dad, let's go to a show," and I'm going to be like, "Okay, let's go to a show." There's a better chance of him really liking it right now than me because I think it's driven more towards younger kids. So I think he's going to be coming into the demographic. For me, I just feel like a little bit I've kind of grown out of it, at least my thought process of it. I still like to watch a very good match. I still like a very good promo. But a lot of the stuff that goes on, I just found a little childish. It's not really what I'm into anymore.
Now, are you speaking pretty specifically to WWE? Because I know you do watch AEW, but are you talking specific to one company or just the industry?
In general, I mean, clearly WWE is more like that. So, but just a couple of weeks ago at the AEW had the pay-per-view that Chris Jericho fell in a pool of mimosa. Not really into that. Like, I didn't find that funny. I didn't find that cool, interesting. I just thought that was kind of lame.
And I do want to touch on that pay-per-view a little bit later because there was it seemed like one of the few big misses for AEW so far during their tenure. But yeah, I will say this. I'm compulsively watching WWE because I've always done it. I feel like that's what I have to do. So I DVR SmackDown, Raw, NXT. I even watched 205 Live, and I had plenty of time to catch up on all of this. And I think we had mentioned before, the original plan was sort of to put this show to bed right around or after WrestleMania this year. But about 3 weeks before that, the world changed. I ended up not having a job, really, for the most part. Plenty of time to watch wrestling, get caught up on it. That was the case for a lot of my cohorts, although you pretty much continued your schedule as normal as possible. So that did extend this by about another 6 months or so, and it was great to be able to catch up on stuff that I had wanted to see. But I will say, I watch Raw and I watch SmackDown with like 60% attention, where I'm gonna scroll Twitter, and I'm not even looking for anything. It's kind of just splitting attention because I'm not fully engaged. I will say this: almost always pay-per-views I watch intently. I don't really interact too much with other stuff. I don't really tweet until a match is over. That seems to be the one thing where I'm really dialed in. And I do go over to my parents' house and watch it with my dad. But regular TV, I don't think I have the same attention to detail as I did 5 years ago. And if I didn't have this like unwavering commitment to just watching everything compulsively, I don't know that just based on enjoyment that I would tune in every single time.
Yeah, that's me. I watched it because I enjoyed it. Then I was watching it, like you said, just because it was ingrained in me. It was something I always did.
And I do that with sports teams too. I watch, the Mariners or 49ers when they're the worst team in the league, much like I'll watch them when they're the best team. But you kind of do have a different engagement.
Right. That and too, baseball, there's a ton of games, but like football or whatever, there's only so many games a year. Wrestling's every single week, multiple times a week. So it's a little different than sports. I got to the point where I realized, why am I watching 3 hours of this if I'm like bored as hell? Like, I'll flip over to something else. If something intrigues me on the show, I'll make sure I tune in for that, but then I'm out. And honestly, the last straw was probably losing the fans, which is wrestling. It's not no one's fault. I can't. A wrestling crowd makes a bad show average, an average show good, a good show great. Without any crowd presence.
And I'll actually say, there was times where I thought there was great matches, and the fans brought it down because they didn't react.
You could do that too. I mean, I'd miss a Monday Night Raw in Chicago or Philadelphia. No offense to Des Moines, Iowa, but when you're there, it's pretty lousy for the most part because the crowd just sits on their hands.
Other than when Seth Rollins is a face, yeah.
Right. But like I miss stuff like that. I think that's hurting AEW. I'm not enjoying AEW as much. But one of the things I enjoyed about that was the passionate crowd. Same thing with NXT.
I think NXT has really suffered, and I think there's a lot of issues with NXT. One of which is they basically are now just trying to combat AEW. They're not necessarily doing what's best for them. So they go from 1 hour to 2 hours. They go from the network to TV. And quite frankly, I think that they sort of changed how they approach the show. And I don't think NXT is nearly as good as it was a year and a half to 2 years ago. But to me, the biggest difference is that show desperately needs a small, intimate fan base that reacts just rabidly to everything. And of course, you expand that to takeovers to full-size arenas. Without that, they lose more with the fan interaction than the main roster by far. And it's really hurt NXT to the point where I actually think it's less enjoyable than a lot of the Raws that I've seen recently.
Well, especially now, that Thunderdome, I mean, that's better than, doing it at the Performance Center, but NXT's not doing it like that. So even makes NXT look even weaker when you still have that just dull setting with, wrestlers just clapping and pounding on the glass like they're at a hockey game. Like, it's not all that great.
So I had mentioned before we would maybe talk about what's going to happen in years to come, and we will touch on that. And again, we also have a message from Sean Saputo, but I do want to kind of get the more recent thoughts from you on what we've seen and the AEW pay-per-view. And I think now we're about 2 weeks removed because we haven't done the show since the last time you and I touched base, the night that Paul Heyman, I believe, was associated with Roman Reigns. Of course, Roman went on to win the title. A lot has changed since then. Now Finn Balor is the NXT champion. But in between, AEW seemed to have one of its bigger bumps in the road with a pay-per-view that I think even AEW fans said that was probably one of their weaker, below average. There's a lot of issues and botches, including some scary ones. Matt Hardy's the notable one, seemingly getting pretty significantly hurt wrestling through it. They said that he did not have a concussion. Common sense says that he probably should not have continued to wrestle. So you would know this better than I, but I know they addressed it. They kind of spoke to it, made it, I don't want to say part of the storyline, but they didn't hide from it. Evan Bourne, Matt Sydal did the same thing where they had someone was, putting, grease or whatever on the ropes, explaining why he botched his shooting star, which that's funny. I'll give them credit because we knew he wasn't like really hurt. Okay. So you can make light of that after the fact. And I wish that WWE and Kevin Owens seems like a guy who would sort of come up with that in his own mind to explain stuff. But that pay-per-view and the fallout from it obviously didn't seem to hurt the ratings, but is that sort of the first chink in the armor you've seen from AEW so far?
Yeah, I mean, you question what the hell they thinking with the Matt Hardy situation. I mean, I think everybody agrees he was knocked out. Like, so if you're knocked out,
and the ref was indicating such.
Right. So even if Matt Hardy gets up and says he's good, you can't listen to the wrestler. It's like a football player. You can't listen to the athlete or anything. You just have to, it was a last man standing match. You just got to change. You just got to change it. Just counter. You know what? Just give the X. I mean, people know, people understand it's wrestling. It should have been stopped. They did go right to the finish. It ended very shortly after, but he shouldn't have went on.
But the finish could have been dangerous in itself for him, right?
Well, he didn't do the spot. I mean, Sammy was the one who went through. So, I mean, for him, but he still had to climb up.
Right,
I mean,
that's what I'm like. That's not good if you have.
It wasn't great thinking, and they immediately went to damage control. I guess he didn't have one. I mean, Matt Hardy came out and said he didn't have one. Unless he's being a company guy.
His wife said the opposite.
Right, but then Tony Khan came back out and said no, he didn't. And his wife has been known to kind of spat off a little bit here and there. I mean, I'm sure she was scared for her husband. I guarantee he's watching a loved one. She's probably freaking out.
Right.
But I mean, luckily he does seem okay. He came out in Dynamite, said it was scary, that he probably shouldn't have, continued. He thanks everyone for caring and reaching out, but he's good. And then kind of turned it into like a wrestling kind of thing. But like, it seems like they got away with one. Got lucky.
I think of WWE with as much criticism as they get, and obviously they deserve a lot of it, and everything that they did wrong in the past with, obviously Owen Hart's tragic death and whatnot. I do feel like when they have a match that's like, where they're going to be doing some high spots, and we've seen Shane do a lot, that's probably as safe of a scenario as you get in wrestling when you work with WWE. That's not to say it's 100%, but they seem to take extra precautions, even if it comes off a little bit more hokey than some other places. But they also have, I think, a really good staff that takes care of the wrestlers if there is an injury, because they've learned the hard way. Maybe this is an example of AEW. They had to go through this to really get better at it. But I always thought, like watching ECW, man, someone could really get hurt and they probably don't have the personnel to actually save a person's life if it comes to it right there.
I would assume that they got the medical personnel on spot there to handle a situation like that. I just don't think it should have went on. Where I think back in the day, you're right, ECW, I don't think they had the medical people to handle what they needed to handle. Luckily, they got through where no one got seriously injured there.
So, what did you see from that point on from AEW? Because I know they did some significant numbers, and a lot of that was because NXT was on Tuesday, or AEW was moved to Thursday, I think, a couple times. So they weren't going head-to-head all that often, and it seemed like the numbers increased for both.
Yes.
Come back to head-to-head, NXT goes down quite a bit. AEW also went down, but still stayed relatively strong.
Yeah. What this tells me is, for the love of God, get NXT off of Wednesdays, which it sounds, there's rumors that it looks like they're looking to maybe move it to Tuesdays. USA actually wants it moved to Tuesdays because they want better ratings.
But Vince looks at it like, we want to keep down the competition's ratings, because let's be honest, if AEW trends up, they get not that far from Raw and SmackDown.
Right, because 2 weeks ago when they were on Wednesday without NXT, they hit over 1 million viewers, which is a pretty big deal.
And Raw is sometimes around 1.7.
1.7 to 1.5, depending on the Raw. Yeah, so, I mean...
And keep in mind, Monday Night Football should probably hinder that rating for the next 3 months.
True. And even SmackDown is just under 2. I mean, it's in the high ones, but it's not over 2. Maybe occasionally they get over 2, just barely. But, I mean, there's not a lot of wrestling fans. And this past week, AEW went down to about 800,000, 835. NXT really got hit hard. So it seems more when it's head to head, the majority of the people do turn into AEW. So but if USA is calling the shots and they're the ones putting out the money and they want the show on Tuesdays, ultimately who wins out?
I really do wonder if AEW did not come along, and certainly if they didn't come along on Wednesdays, would NXT be on USA right now?
No,
I would lean towards probably not, although USA wanted more wrestling after they lost SmackDown. So, I mean, you can sort of see that side of it. But it'll be interesting. I think when we talked about this, because we were at the forefront discussing the implications of another promotion, and you really pounded home the point that it's going to help everyone involved. Well, it hasn't really created wrestling interest necessarily. It hasn't increased viewership overall across the board. But do you think that we have seen improvement overall in the wrestling industry, or is it WWE really hasn't changed at all and just gives another option for some of the fans one night a week?
I don't really think WWE's changed at all too
I
much.
agree. I don't think that the idea that competition would make them stronger, I don't think applies in 2019 and 2020.
No, and the fact too, I mean, AEW Dynamite started in October. What, 4 months later, 5 months later, like we talked about, the world changed. So it's really hard to gauge, is Drew McIntyre really over? We don't know because he hasn't performed as champion in front of a crowd. It's hard to judge these things. Is the Roman Reigns quasi-heel turn working? We don't really know. Is AEW certain guys really over? Again, we don't know because there's no now. Granted, AEW is starting to let fans in, like 200 or so, seated kind of far away.
But that's very much like not the accurate reflection of the entire fan base by any means.
No, because they're the locals. It's kind of like an NXT crowd. They're going to be the same people there all the time because they're in Jacksonville. I mean,
right.
It is what it is.
And the NXT crowd certainly does not reflect how the main roster fan base feels.
Right. So it's until there's fans in the stands again, it's hard to say if wrestling's better from a product standpoint, but it's definitely better for the wrestler. We saw guys let go by WWE who then got picked up by AEW who otherwise wouldn't be employed right now.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be doing something, Ring of Honor, independent, but not as steady.
But
right.
AEW is going to be more money than making maybe $1,000 at an indie show, for an appearance.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think we get to a point where AEW legitimately challenges WWE? And I mean that not in like a TNA or ECW or anything. Basically, do we see WCW, WWF all over again down the road?
That's hard to say. I want to say no because it's just been so long. It's been 20 years since that's like even happened. What AEW has on its side is it's on a good channel, that it has the proper support, and they have somebody who's actually richer than Vince McMahon backing them. The money is there. That's what wrestling needs. TNA didn't have the money.
Do you think they would benefit from spending more money than they are now? Like, what should they outbid WWE for let's say Roman Reigns if he decides to let his contract come up and he finds out that AEW is offering him $10 million a year.
Yeah, that's how WCW got to where they were. They had to outbid for certain stars. I mean, Brock Lesnar, I guess, is a free agent right now, and he's a named guy. I really don't want to see Brock Lesnar there, but it makes business sense. You get Brock Lesnar there, outlets are going to cover that. They cover you. You hit the mainstream. More people are going to tune in.
Do you think AEW will open up the checkbook like that? I personally, Justin, I think when you look at someone like Brock Lesnar, he's going to stay with WWE, I think, because they have that relationship. But you have to wonder about some of the younger guys who are maybe ascending to main event status. You talk Roman Reigns, you talk about Seth Rollins, Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton. They're probably all going to be WWE guys, but there's potential that there's going to be other future main eventers who Ricochet's a name that comes up, and he's not like at that big superstar status yet, but he could get there. Kevin Owens definitely seems like a type of guy who would fit in with AEW. He's a former champion and pretty significant. What if Drew McIntyre, are those the type of guys that maybe are even a little bit more realistic to really shift it? Guys that are at their prime or maybe even still have further to grow?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Ricochet would have been my number one pick. If I'm that he's perfect. His style, his wrestling style is perfect for AEW.
And he might have signed there all along if that was an option when he was ready to sign with a company.
Yeah, because WWE has just squandered him. He's a nobody on the main roster. Adam Cole, I think
he could not have been booked any better in NXT. But the concern is, what does he do at the next level?
I think that he could be booked in AEW like he's booked in NXT. he will never, ever, ever be booked like that on the main roster.
Is there a reason why like Ricochet's still on the main roster and not in NXT?
I have no idea.
I mean, they want NXT to do well against AEW, right?
Yes.
Doesn't it seem like to do that, they can go like full like indie style on Wednesday nights with guys like Ricochet in NXT as opposed to doing very little on the main roster?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess you could really load up. Hold on here. I got to move my camera because.
Fair enough, Justin.
Well, I'm about to lose power.
Oh, jeez, Louise.
I mean, it looks like the laptop's saying, let's just cancel the last show even earlier.
No, come on, laptop.
There we go.
We good? All right. Tremendous.
But
good save.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see him. Kevin Owens. Who else I think would be great? Cedric Alexander could get the hell out of there, and I think having there's a lot.
It's funny because the idea generally is WWE realizes like 6 months before a guy's contract is up, maybe 3 months, that they want to keep him. So they're like, oh, sign with us, we'll push you, and then he signs, and then it's like pretty quickly back to just doing nothing, right? And I think that's what the Revival saw was going to happen, and they said we're not going to do that. So I mean, the Revival technically I think were released. But they and Dean Ambrose, now Jon Moxley, those were the big ones where they really made that choice. And it wasn't WWE saying basically like, we're letting you go type of deal. We don't want you here.
I do think Rusev, Miro, even though he was released, I think he kind of made that choice because I think he was trying to force his way out. He clearly wasn't happy there. And there's a guy who got over and
Luke
probably
Harper
more over than they wanted.
Multiple times before they finally let him go.
Right, and he got over more than they wanted him to, which is funny. They say, grab the brass ring. Certain people have grabbed it, but if you get more over than what Vince wants you to be, then you almost get punished for it. Another guy I would love AEW to have that I think would help them, Keith Lee. That dude has...
But he does seem like a guy who maybe does become a big deal in WWE's main roster.
Did you read? I read that they actually don't have a plan for Keith Lee. Like right now, he's up there doing this thing, but they really don't have any long-term plans. So that doesn't bode well for the guy.
Yeah, but that doesn't scare me that much because, like, I don't know that they really follow through with any long-term plans anyway.
True.
Like, I think if Vince likes you, you'll make it work somehow.
Yes. I think it would be big, too, if AEW can get a working relationship with, like, New Japan, something like how Ring of Honor did, to bring some of those Japanese guys in that maybe the people in the States really don't know, but hell, the matches would be amazing.
And that'll work a lot better. It worked with Ring of Honor because those type of fans, it's a lot easier now than when you had to trade tapes back in the 90s, but those fans will do their research or maybe already know these Japanese wrestlers. NXT fans will, and we've seen that with some of the tournaments that they had with Kota Ibushi and even with the women on the Mae Young side. But the main roster fans just don't care about that stuff. So you do have to have a different type of show to appeal to, I think, a wider cast of fans. Is that going to be a missing link for AEW? Will they be able to ever get casual viewers as opposed to the hardcore wrestling fans, which we know represent about 1 million or so people now?
They might. I mean, time will tell. That's
the way that they, I think, ultimately would challenge WWE, is they have to bring in fans that aren't even aware necessarily that they exist.
Right, and what sucks is, like we said, they only had a couple months to get going, get their feet wet, and all this happened. And luckily they're going to survive. Since this happened, they signed a new contract where they're going to be on the air, I think, for at least another 3 years. They got money, so they have time.
They're doing a second show. Is that correct?
There are rumors that there might be doing a second show. I mean, they have AEW Dark, which is on YouTube that you can watch. But yeah, I mean, and I'm sure if the ratings stay in around 1 million, TNT might want to do a second show. And I mean, they probably have the roster now to do 2 shows because there's some people that could probably get a little bit more airtime. Now, it's kind of hard to tell because some people are kind of stuck. I mean, there's a lot of people that we've seen on AEW that we haven't seen since the pandemic hit because they can't get back into the country.
Yeah, and that's all over the place as well. And I believe NXT UK is going to start back up soon if it hasn't already. But those guys who were over there, I think they're still over there.
Yes.
You know, they're not coming over to North America, and you lose some really talented individuals. Pete Dunne, of course, we know he had to basically give up his share of a tag team title because he couldn't come over, and they have the cruiserweight champion. They had to do a tournament. So, like, there's a lot that could, for the rest of 2020, still be sort of in flux with a lot of that stuff. And you talk about a working relationship with New Japan. That's probably not going to happen until this all gets, hopefully sooner rather than later, squared away where people feel like we're truly back to normal.
Yeah. I mean, you hear things in the news, you know, maybe early next year, you know, I'm really, at this point,
I thought when we talked about this in April, I think probably the consensus was by now we would be back to, we thought SummerSlam would be the time maybe that they get fans back in.
Yeah. I mean, we're starting to see in some instances it's happening. I mean, athletic competition, like football games, we're seeing fans starting to enter at minimum capacity, which I think we're ready to, you know, do like a 10-15% capacity. Now I get it. Wrestling's indoors. Outdoors, it's safer. So we have to wait and see when it comes time to restart the NHL and the NBA again. When are we going to be allowed indoors? I mean, if we start getting a vaccine early next year and people start taking it, or herd immunity happens, I don't know. If the numbers start going down, they start letting people in. I mean, that would be nice. I mean, it would be odd to see a wrestling show with maybe 5,000 people in a 15,000 seat arena all spread out. But
I've seen it. I've seen less than that. It's called 205 Live after SmackDown.
I mean, it's a start. I mean, locally here, our local promotion has been running shows at a independent baseball stadium.
The Wild Things Park, correct?
Yes. So, and they've been doing, I think, 250 people in an outside baseball park to hold their shows. And I mean, that seems to be working.
They could do high school football stadiums if they wanted to do that as well. It's the same type of situation. Certainly makes sense to do whatever you can. And I would be okay with WWE showing a little bit of creativity with that. Now, they did do the Thunderdome, but it's the same thing every single time now. So, like, 3 or 4 weeks in, it's already kind of like, well, who cares? Other than, I do think, I have no interest probably in doing it. I don't think you would either. But for people who want to see themselves on TV, I guess it's kind of cool. Other than that, it doesn't really make it any more enjoyable of a watch to me.
No, and it's, from what I was able to read, if you do get to do it, there's a list of strict rules you must follow. And it just makes me want to go.
I can't go and take a sign that says 5-star podcast of wrestling to kind of promote the...
No, and I think you can't boo who they want you to cheer, and you basically got to follow their rules.
Well, that's ridiculous. Like, I understand other things that you have to, monitor, but let the fans cheer or boo or be indifferent as long as they want. But that's
that person that put up that Fire Velveteen Dream sign.
I told you I wouldn't even have an issue with that. Honestly, I think.
But they do. I don't, but they do.
I want to, I mentioned before, Sean Saputo sent a message along. Now, he was the very first co-host with me, did a great job. He's not even in the same state anymore, just to show how far this has come in 2.5 years. He's now in Texas. So, not wearing a cowboy hat for this video, but Sean was kind enough to send in a message that he had for us. He was a very instrumental part, and I know that his schedule wasn't always allowing, but he's come back many times, kind of fill the voids when you weren't available. So the original co-host, Sean Saputo, has a message for the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Let's hear that now.
Hey Sean, it's Sean. Just wanted to send this in for the final episode of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling and say congratulations on the show coming to an end. It's unfortunate that this show is not going to be able to go on because every week I enjoyed watching every episode of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I was honored to be the first co-host that you had for this show, and I was honored to be on this show whenever you needed somebody to be on the show. I enjoyed every single second of being on the show with you and every single second listening to the show. A lot of fun times, a lot of predictions that we made correctly, a lot of predictions that we can look back on and say, wow, that was pretty skeptical. But it was always a good time being on the show with you, Sean, and it's unfortunate that it has to end, but you have a lot of work that you have to get going on, and there's a lot of people that were on the show that, have plenty on their plate. So it's a good time for the show to end, unfortunately, but I'll cherish every moment of watching the show and being a part of the show. So congratulations, Sean. Congratulations to the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. And hopefully one day, as time goes on, maybe this show can get a kickstart. But for now, congratulations, and here's to the future.
Have you ever met Sean Saputo in person?
I have not.
We need to set that up one day. It will be like we'll get a picture. You, Sean Saputo, and I, all together, the three-headed monster, if you will. The two main co-hosts, and I do want to thank everyone else that ultimately over the years was a part of this. Of course, Sean Benjamin and Eddie DiUrio recently made some really nice contributions on a pretty regular basis. We've also had a lot of 1 or 2 time guests over the year. Originally, Justin, this is funny. You remember the graphic that had myself and 3 other co-hosts? You weren't on there. You were kind of upset about it, and you had a point because Sean Saputo was on there, deservedly so. Kyle Dawson and Donnie Chedrick were on there. Kyle did one show with me, and it was actually 3 different episodes because there was a short period of time where I tried to go like short episodes and do multiple of them. Really was not the best idea, but Kyle did that one time where we had like a pay-per-view preview, but also like a Raw and SmackDown review or something like that. Donnie Chedrick, it took him almost 2 years to come on, but he had a killer episode when he ran down his project of watching all of the WrestleManias in a span of a year, grading what was the best, the worst, favorite matches, favorite moments. That was a really cool one. Appreciate him coming on and doing that as well. Of course, Rennie Detour was on many times. We've had a number of people that were affiliated with the KSWA. So you could check all of those out. Harley T. Morris was actually our most watched episode of all time. And Justin, probably your favorite guest that we've ever had on the show, Bobby O, the founder of the KSWA and a colleague of mine. Again, I'm leaving some people out. But we've had a lot of different voices on over 2.5 years. Truthfully, I probably should have done even better getting different people involved with wrestling on. But I think it was always enjoyable. I will say this. The numbers do not reflect the quality of the show because I've seen a lot of podcast shows. Most of them are audio. We bring the video because it's a visual world here in 2020. But I think that a lot do better numbers that just don't have the quality. They're just hard to listen to. People rambling, as I've been doing for the last 30 seconds or so. I think if you go back and watch any of our old episodes, you will see pretty good quality, regardless if it's me interviewing someone, you and I talking, myself and Sean, whomever. I do think that they will stand the test of time. And, there's a lot of shows like Family Guy and whatnot. They weren't that popular at first. They became a sensation after they went off the air and came back. So I don't know if that's in the future or not, but I do feel pretty good about the quality of this show for the past 2.5 years. What are we playing here, Justin? What was that? Are you tearing up?
I mean, with this speech, I just felt like I had to, pull up a song or something. It felt that the emotion was starting to build here.
I should know. Is it Sarah McLachlan? Is that?
It is.
That's the sister of Duke McLachlan.
Yeah, it's a music video here on YouTube.
There we go.
So there we go. Enough of that. Yeah, it's been a good 2.5 years. There was a big guest there that that you could maybe reeled in. But maybe there's too many hoops to jump through to get that.
That is true, and I think I've tried to kind of minimize my relationship with Elias, but a WWE wrestler, especially a particular popular one, you have to go through a lot, and I don't think we quite got the name recognition that the
But,
WWE PR people really would have paid much attention to a request. And certainly the last thing I want to do is get him in any hot water because you know how Vince McMahon is. Let's be honest. Something can tick him off very easily. So we did not get Elias, unfortunately. That was probably the missing link. But I feel like we did put together a pretty good show. And I will say this, Justin. You and I talked about this off the air. The sadness is the fact that I see you only a handful of times a year. And I have not seen you now. And I don't even know if at all in 2020.
I don't think so. I mean, like we talked about earlier, things kind of changed. I became a dad a year and a half ago. And you actually have yet to even meet my son. We've hung out since he's been born, but we went out to bars and such, and he stayed.
He didn't go to the bars, right?
No, he didn't go to the bar, and then COVID
we haven't even
hit.
gone to a wrestling show. I don't know in over a year because we would try to go to an independent show usually, if not
right. Like
WWE.
The last wrestling show I went to was actually AEW Dynamite, but you did not go to that. I forget why. You had something going. Work.
I actually could not have gone, but I probably would not have gone anyway. But I'm in Vince's pocket, Justin. You know
you
that.
are. Yeah. You're the Kevin Dunn of this show. Okay. Yes. Bruce Pritchard.
Yes.
Yes. So it has been a while. I mean,
and that's the good thing about doing something like this. And Sean Saputo, like I said, he's in Texas. I don't know when I'm going to see him again. I mean, I'm sure he'll come home maybe once, twice a year, but doing things like this, and obviously the secret is that we're doing it via Skype. We're not in the same location, as you could probably tell. So it's a great way to keep in touch, and that will certainly be a void, but we'll have to maybe kind of work around that. I think our friendship will survive, but it is going to certainly be a little bit of a loss getting to talk to you face to face, if you will, on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah. I mean, we only live like a half an hour away from each other, so people here are watching this. We're not hours apart. It's just
only if we walk, it would be hours, I would say.
Hours, yeah. The last couple of years, I've made it a point when you did a high school game on a Friday night out this way to meet up with you after, and we would go out. But
by the way, I was in Greensburg last night, Justin. 700 wins now for the Golden Lions.
Oh, see, and we really can't do that right now.
That is correct. Rialto's was not even open, my friend.
That's right. I can't really, get into bars. If you do, you can't really sit at the bar. You have to wear a mask. I can't get into a football stadium. So we're kind of limited on what we can do. And now winter's coming. So yeah,
that's a big catchphrase.
What, winter's coming?
Yes.
Game of Thrones.
Yes,
big fan. Season 8 though sucked.
My parents will know what that means. I never watched it. But anyway, I will say this, Justin. You and many of my other friends, I still know when I do get together with them again, and I'm sure it will happen hopefully sooner rather than later. One of the first things I'm going to talk about with them is professional wrestling. So that's what's made doing this show so fun for the last 2.5 years. Again, we started this just before WrestleMania 34. We've now seen 36 WrestleManias passed and 149 episodes. Again, maybe down the road, many, many years from now, we'll have the whole gang together. Big party for a reunion episode of number 150. But I think it's time to put a bow on this one, Justin. Again, I do thank you. This was pretty much your idea that you came to me and said you should do a wrestling podcast. I took that to heart, and ultimately we decided to make it work. Went through some hurdles, some challenges, but over the years I think it's been well worth it, even if we didn't get the recognition maybe that I had hoped. Any final thoughts before we sign off one last time, Justin?
My name might be Justin, but at least I'm not Justin LeBar.
That is how we end it. All right, for my co-host, Justin Lowery, Sean Meyers, I will note that we will still keep the Twitter. I don't know how active I might be on it. Most importantly, we'll keep the Instagram as well. I always point the wrong way. I can't. There it is. 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. The most important thing is we'll keep the YouTube channel, which I think is going to be great because you could go back and check out the episodes if you want to go back and look at any of those interviews I talked about. If you want to see the first episode and see how horrible it was compared to where we are now, there was some issues with Sean Saputo's microphone. It looked like he was in some sort of prehistoric cave using a camera on dial-up. We've gone a long way since then. That's a good thing. So I would say we leave on this high note. But again, we will have all that. If you want to check out the YouTube channel, you can see all previous 148 videos with myself, Justin, and many of our good friends. But for now, for one last time, we will sign off. For Justin Lowery, Sean Meyers, thank you so much for tuning in to the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.